Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm broadcasting today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I acknowledge their elders, past and present, and their young emerging leaders. I pay my respects for the ongoing custodianship of Eora lands, and I acknowledge their resilience and survival as their territories bore the brunt of the first wave of British invasion and its colonial aftermath, which are ongoing. I also pay my respects to all First peoples joining us today. These lands are stolen lands. Sovereignty has never ceded, and treaties are yet to be negotiated. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So, hello, my name is Armin, and I'm going to be the participating chair of this panel. So I will start with introducing everyone to you. I'm a lecturer in the School of Law at the University of Wollongong, where I research at the intersection of technology, science, and law. My current projects investigate the ethical and legal implications of cutting-edge developments in artificial intelligence, big data, genetics, and neuroscience. I have previously been involved in ethical AI projects, including a project funded by DFAT. I'm a coding nerd, and I'm currently collaborating with colleagues at UNSW Sydney to prototype AI-powered tools for potential use in education and research. My hair is actually blue, and it's not a visual effect. So next, Terry. Terry is the Executive Director of the Center for Legal Innovation at the College of Law. She works internationally with leaders of legal businesses to help them identify and analyze emerging trends in order to develop strategies to deliver services and products in the new legal ecosystems. She's the driving force behind the College of Law's global initiatives, networks, and programs, including the Legalpreneur Lab and the Innovation Incubator Program. Terry has received widespread recognition and acclaim as an industry thought leader and advocate for women in law. Next, Alex. Alex is a manager in KPMG's legal operations and transformation services team and specializes in the legal transformation advisory and product design and development. He has broad experience in digital transformation and innovation across the telecommunications, property, and legal industries, as well as expertise in legal service design and legal product development and legal operation. Alex has previously held transformation and innovation roles at Gilbert and Tobin, Vicinity Centers, and NBN. He was also responsible for researching and writing Australia's first research report on the Internet of Things and consumer issues. Finally, Lyria. Lyria is the director of Allen's Hub for Technology, Law, and Innovation, and a professor and associate dean of research in the Faculty of Law and Justice at UNSW Sydney. She is the co-lead of the Law and Policy team in the Cybersecurity Cooperative Research Center and the faculty lead in the UNSW Institution for Cybersecurity. Lyria's research explores issues around relationship between technology and law, including the types of legal issues that arise as the technology changes. She has also worked on legal and policy issues associated with artificial intelligence, as well as the need for oversight for law enforcement intelligence. So welcome everyone, and it's so great to have this panel about some very interesting topic. If you have any questions, please post your questions in the Q&A section, and if we had time at the very end, we will try to answer as many questions as possible. So the whole reason for this session is, as you know, AI has been affecting our lives in many different ways. And it may sound surprising, but in today's world, there are many good AIs out there that the public can access and build the stuff. And we are kind of at the point that we can more confidently predict that the future of the legal profession will be affected by how we gonna embrace and leverage these new technologies, including artificial intelligence. And that's why today we're gonna have that discussion. And before I begin and talk about anything, I'm gonna just add something very boring, probably, about definition of AI. And as many of you know, there is no clear definition of what is AI, and some people don't like even the term AI. But in general, in today's discussion, we're gonna talk about two different types of AI, expert systems and machine learning. Expert systems are those that kind of old-fashioned AI, we call them. It's just simple, some say algorithm, if and then programming. One example is if you buy alcohol from Woolies, the system would be like, if the person is buying alcohol, when you're doing it online, the delivery person then has to check their ID. And then it says, if they're checking their ID, they have to check whether they're above 18. And if the answer is yes, then give them the alcohol. So that's the if then programming, and we are providing all the information and rules for the system. However, in machine learning, we usually give a lot of data to the system. And if we provide enough data, the system will learn the rules. So it will find the patterns, then it will be able to, with some accuracy, predict some outcomes. There are huge differences between these two types of AI. Many people don't consider expert systems, the first system that I just discussed, as an AI. And if we consider it as an AI, I would be some kind of mad AI scientist, because I've been making this kind of automated systems since high school. So yeah, we will discuss further why this distinction is important, and as much as we can, we will refer to, as we discuss, we're going to say whether it's expert system or machine learning, because machine learning is the type of AI that in today's world, when we say AI, people are usually referring to machine learning and not expert systems. Okay, so with that introduction, let's start the conversation. Let's start with this question. What are some of the current uses of AI in legal profession? How about Alex, you start with that one?
Yeah, thanks, Armin. So in the kind of role that I do, it's predominantly consulting, and a lot of that consulting is to in-house legal departments. So a lot of what I'm seeing is how much demand we're seeing in a lot of the use cases that are coming from general counsel and their teams, but also what law firms are adopting and what they're offering these legal functions. So one of the, I guess, the biggest and probably most valuable use case at the moment is using some kind of AI system for document analysis and review, particularly large scale review. So a great example is the due diligence component of M&A. So a couple of specific use cases would be using AI or OCR, so optical character recognition, to digitalize some contracts. So believe it or not, a lot of legal functions still have paper contracts, and often they might need to scan them and upload them into PDF. These systems can be quite good at taking those images and turning them into text or turning them into information, unless there's a blur or a coffee stain or something like that. And I've seen that those limitations in the past. Another use case related to document review is the ability to extract key information from documents. So if a document is structured in a certain way, such as a contract, these algorithms can extract information and compile it into structured data. So if you feed it 1,000 documents of the same kind, contracts, for example, it can be taught to recognize that if they see contract date hyphen space date format, that date can be extracted and put into a table, for example. Other use cases.
Alex, what is the accuracy of these kind of systems? So it's a machine learning system.
It varies amongst different vendors and different providers. So some providers have been in the space for quite a while. They have a lot of data to have taught the models. They do a lot of supervised and unsupervised learning of the models, but it varies. I wouldn't say all of them are 100% yet. Maybe some of them accidentally get 100%. But we are seeing kind of studies out there that get pretty close, so 99%, and they kind of compare that to human review as the gold standard. But it varies wildly, and that's kind of one of the challenges with the legal industry, is that anything less than 100% is quite risky, and so building that accuracy is, I think, a key enabler to building the trust, which will then lead to adoption. But just very quickly, some other use cases is using a different form of AI called NLP, so natural language processing. And what that does is effectively turns human language into some form of insight or decision. So a really good use case is a chatbot. You speak to the chatbot, it understands what you want, and it directs your query accordingly. A lot in the legal industry, e-discovery, so the ability to basically search, locate, and extract insights from large troves of data has been used quite a lot. So Gilbert and Tobin, where I was working previously, and KPMG have quite a large capability in this area because there's a lot of demand for it in the industry. And another use case more broadly is around prediction. So AI is very good at analyzing large troves of data and finding patterns. And as a result, it can be used for things like predictive litigation, so predicting outcomes of litigation, although there are biases. It can predictively triage matters. So a lot of hospitals, for example, use AI to triage requests based on prioritization rules, and also any predictive analytics. So being able to analyze large troves of data and predict what kind of workloads will come in, the volume of workloads, the nature of workloads. But those are kind of broader use cases that I've seen across the industry.
Great, thank you. Terry, do you want to add any?
Yeah, just a couple, and hi everyone, thanks for having me. Yeah, I think it's taking some of those point source solutions, kind of single purpose solutions in a way that Alex has referred to, and to me how they've then become connected together. So whether they've become connected together as part of a contract lifecycle management system, or whether they've become connected together in such a way, or allowed or supported the ability to kind of create self-service kiosks, I guess. And legal research is obviously another one there that it gets used for, but kind of flipping out of the practice of law stuff and flipping into the business of law stuff, you know, obviously we're using this to kind of undertake a whole bunch of different analyses around things like billing and pricing and performance reviews and marketing for client preferences. So lots of different applications across the board, I think, in kind of the legal world, whether it's you know, whether it's a practice of law or the business of law. And I know Lyria is going to tell us some really cool stuff about the courts.
Okay, on that note, and thank you for having me as well. So some of the stuff that happens in courts is also happening in practice, right? So we talk about, you know, the use of AI in legal research. Well, you know, judges sometimes do that too. So you know, leaving aside that kind of thing, perhaps some of the, you know, it goes sort of from low stakes to sort of higher stakes. So at the sort of low stakes end, you've kind of got things like automated filing systems, right? Where and this is beyond digitization. So this is beyond the ability to sort of do basic e-filing where it's done not with paper, but with digital files, but to the point that those files can kind of be pre-scanned and tested against criteria, for example. So that, say, if it's not, you know, in the right format or it's something like that, that will be detected and the filing will be refused. So there's sort of automation in that kind of context. At the high stakes end, you've got things like the use, particularly in the United States, although it is also used elsewhere, of sort of risk assessment tools in the context of things like sentencing. So this is the sort of very controversial end, where essentially, and a lot of people have heard of systems like Compass, and it's become, you know, a sort of broader controversy around the use of these things. But essentially, the idea is that you have a risk assessment tool that takes, you know, properties of humans and works out, you know, what is their propensity to reoffend based on historic data of people like them and people not like them, and whether or not those people ended up reoffending. It then assumes you're going to do the same thing more or less probabilistically as people like you, gives you a score, and then that gets factored into a sentencing decision. It's not automated end to end, so it's not, I don't think anyone's doing it that, you know, the computer says 7 years in jail or anything like that. But the idea is that these kinds of scores in the United States in particular get factored into sentencing decisions. There's all sorts of other uses, one can keep going. And again, a lot of them parallel. So, using things like natural language processing in the context of transcripts and so forth. But perhaps we'll go from examples into a more interesting conversation.
Yeah, and we have AI course or AI judges, right? In Estonia, for instance. Last night I was talking to someone about Estonia and their digital governments, and it was just amazing. But I was very surprised that they call some of the courts, some of the judges or their system, that these are AI judges. But as you said, there are not, many of them are not that matters that are very sensitive, or they're usually, yeah.
So there's two ways in which that can work, and it mirrors your sort of expert system machine learning distinction from earlier. So you can absolutely take the kind of, relatively simple areas of law often dealt with in local courts, pet found without, proper collar or whatever, those kinds of things, and turn them into if-then rules, right? So if this, then that, if this, then that, resulting in, therefore your fine is $250. And in particular, in the sort of low stakes decisions, and particularly where there is the ability to appeal, where you do feel that that isn't the right answer for your case, that's relatively, often quite low stakes. And then you've got the sort of potential idea, at least, and I'm not sure if anyone's going this full scale yet, of using machine learning to determine things, and often discussed in the context of higher stakes matters. So you could, for example, think about something like family law property settlements, and put that through a sort of machine learning thing, and instead of the judge going through and working it out and forming views on particular things, you can have some sort of like, the split is going to be this, and this is how much money this person gets, and so forth, again, based on a sort of machine learning analysis of earlier outcomes. Now, you can do that at the law firm end as just a prediction, like when you tell someone, if you fight this in court, you're probably going to get X. And again, that's kind of okay. I think when you start talking about doing that kind of thing in courts, it's really quite deeply problematic. And you have to ask a lot more questions about what it really means to exercise judgment versus to predict an outcome.
Yeah, so we have this bail assistance program being developed in Australia by Judicial Commission of New South Wales, that it's going to use machine learning system to help predict the bail decision and bail decision makers. What do you think about that? Do you think that's a high risk matter and it shouldn't exist because we are still developing it?
I can keep going, but if anyone else wants to come in, let me know. So I think that comes up with this very similar problems to the systems being used in the US in the context of bail and sentencing that I spoke about earlier. So first of all, the first question is what variables get used. So if you look at the US system, the compass system that, as I said, often gets spoken about in this context, there's all sorts of variables in there that I think people would feel really uncomfortable using in a bail decision. So one example of a variable is whether your parents are divorced or still together, and if they're split up, how old were you when that happened? Now, that might indeed correlate with things. We might know from psychological research or sociological research that that might have an impact on criminality, and so forth, probabilistically again, not destiny. But even if that's true, right, and I'm not going to be the statistician here, there's a real question of whether we should be making decisions, whether that's sentencing, bail, or anything else, around variables that are beyond a person's control. It's one thing to say, here's a decision because you've committed 20 offences and they're really high scale and people have died, versus saying something that your parents might have done, which is merely relevant to you because of a statistical correlation. And I think those two things have to be kept very far apart. So partly I want to know about the tool and what it does and what the variables are. The second problem is it leads to, there's all sorts of errors in these kinds of systems, and there's all sorts of feedback loops. So as an example, if you have, you're sort of, you're learning off the data, you're giving people bail, and then you're seeing what they do. Do they turn up to court? Do they commit crimes, and so forth? But the only people you're measuring after you implement the system is the people to whom you've granted bail. So you end up with a sort of natural statistical bias in the collection of data that skews ongoing results. What that means, more or less, is that an error you originally have doesn't get fixed, despite the fact that the system continues to learn. I can keep going, but I think broadly the answer is, A, it depends on the system and what gets used and how it's assessed, and what its performance criteria are, including things like differential impact on different populations and so forth. But second, I suppose it's a little bit of a be careful, because sometimes things sound better than they actually are. And there's a lot of marketing spin in these systems.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Lyria. So next question for you, Alex. These systems that we discussed, some of them are not necessarily about their accuracy, that AI increase the accuracy. It's about how much time and cost we save, right? So considering that, how helpful these systems could be, how's the business in your organization? Because that's what you do, right? Departments come to you and say, help us to find what type of AI or legal technology, legal tech is useful for us. So I want to know, what is the trend, how things are happening in the changing in the last couple of years? Do you see more people, more departments and organizations approaching you, or things hasn't changed?
Yeah, so we've certainly seen, both from my experience, our collective experience with talking to our global teams, as well as obviously keeping finger on the pulse through industry surveys and things like that, we see a bigger interest in AI tools, and it does fluctuate. So we see some years where when legal departments are asked, what have you adopted, AI becomes high, or what are you planning to adopt? AI is top 3 in the list, for example. And then we have other years where it dips because their focus has shifted towards contract lifecycle management or matter management, for example. So I think overall there is an interest there, but until there are clear use cases, and until there's clear needs, and until there's clear trust, I think that will really drive the adoption of a lot of these tools. In law firms, the use case is quite a bit different. So if we break down what are the actual jobs that are trying to be done, or what do they want to achieve from the adoption of AI, legal departments, it's typically around, currently, most of the demand is around document review. So it's around being able to automatically extract information from documents, do comparison between documents, because that actually assists them in their day-to-day job, which is reviewing, negotiating documents. And it gets rid of a lot of that crappy manual work and human error that it really is the value proposition for these kinds of things. On the flip side, we have law firms who are still using it in the same way, but they're using it either internally to become more efficient. So using it for due diligence, for example. So instead of having an army of juniors working till 3 in the morning, doing document review and sipping, coffee endlessly, you can use these tools to maybe not do the entire job, but at least it can cluster, the 36 out of 1,000 documents that look like employment contracts. So that's cool. Let's send them to the employment lawyers. Or it can at least extract some data with varying levels of confidence so that you don't have to. But I think right now, the best we're going to get is a hybrid approach. And again, the adoption of e-discovery is much larger in law firms because they actually offer it as a client service, because they actually have the scalability and they have enough demand coming in for them to justify an e-discovery team, an e-discovery tool. Whereas if you go to a legal function with, let's say, 30 lawyers across the Asia Pacific, they're not going to invest in buying, procuring, assessing, training on these tools, using the tools, maintaining the tools, teaching the tools, because it's just not worth it for them. So I think in terms of buying AI specific tools, most of where I'm seeing it now for legal functions is like Terry said, where the AI module or feature is part of a bigger solution. So contract lifecycle management is a really good use case. So these systems effectively help with the end-to-end process of managing contracts, from drafting to negotiation to execution to post-execution management. So where does it fit into that? Well, if you pull in a contract or contracts being negotiated, the AI can pull out any key information from the contract, keep it in a table so you can do reporting. You can set up automated notifications when something's about to expire, things like that. But I haven't seen too much adoption of tools that are just AI, like a Kira or a Luminance or anything like that.
So considering that, again, it's gonna save the department a lot of money, and some of them are considering it, and it seems the movement is being very slow comparing to some other industries. Would you tell me or agree that, for instance, in medicine, they're much ahead of law, and what is the reason? What is holding us back?
Well, I could shorten it for you, and by saying so much tech, so little time. But I guess I really do think in part that's true. It can be kind of quite overwhelming if you're trying to match, and I think it's always important to match your client needs to what tech you need to buy, if you need to buy any tech at all, but to make sure that you know what needs you're kind of trying to service before you start. But I think once you start along that, then it can be kind of quite overwhelming. I think the situation on choosing tech is improving for a bunch of different reasons. One of them is that there are more sophisticated consultancies like the one that Alex works in, and the other big fours, and of course some law firms, and Alex has mentioned some of those as well, that now have actually been through the process themselves. So effectively they're advising on something that's a lived experience versus just looking at a bunch of demos. So they've really got that. But I think the other thing that's really helping in that respect is the rise of platforms. And they come in kind of with different hats on, but there are the sort of platforms where you can jump in, like Rain and Court. You can jump in, there's a whole bunch of pre-selected technologies. You can try them out, you can demo them, you can choose which ones you want and then deploy them. So you've got kind of a built-in level of being able to both trust the folks that have choose those and verified them, but also being able to try them out. But I think we're also seeing something I was going to say is basic, but it's not basic because it's becoming increasingly sophisticated, but something like the Office 365 suite, where we're seeing, pretty much everybody's got that, right? And so we're just seeing that functionality increase all the time, where there's just more and more available, where people are already familiar with a certain part of that platform. So it's not a huge leap for them to start becoming familiar now with another part of that platform. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. So I think we are going to see, for example, the platforms that are dedicated just for litigators or just for kind of deal makers. We're going to kind of see that collection, that verification, that thinning out process, as well as folks that are already in the market just expanding their products as well. So I think that's going to help a lot. But going back to what Alex was saying as well, I think it is an issue with trust. I think it's a lack of familiarity. I think that time really is a big issue for a lot of people that are trying to make these choices. So it's not any one thing, it's a combination of things. But I also want to say that it's inevitable. If you look at every other industry, as you referenced, Armin, at the beginning of this, we know that we're going to have to get on board. And now we've got catch up to do, which fortunately we can because of the nature of technology, but it's just kind of like it's not negotiable, we've got to jump on board. So things are improving, I think, to make the decisions easier, but I do still think we are at the point that for many it's quite overwhelming.
Yeah. If I can probably add to that as well. Yeah, absolutely. I think we're kind of shifting towards the topic of what's actually driving that demand and what are the enablers. And I think from my point of view, the first one is trust. So, lawyers are trained to be risk averse. Their job is to be risk averse, and they have a natural tendency towards, skepticism towards certain things. So that trust threshold is usually a lot higher for that kind of industry, just because of the nature of the work and the riskiness of the work. So how is that trust enabled? I mean, a couple of the ways that we've seen it overcome is an understanding of how the system works. So from their point of view, they put a document in or they ask it a question, something happens in the background, and then they get an answer. So, you put in an image you put in some kind of image of an animal and it comes out, it's a cat, 93% accuracy. You're like, well, how? Like, how did you make that decision? So understanding, even at a high level, how these things work and make decisions enables trust, so that transparency piece. Also repeatable and kind of demonstrated accuracy, because at the end of the day, they're trying to get a job done. And that job done is get a contract out, do a review. They don't care how it's done. But ultimately, if they can prove that, look, the accuracy is 100% or it is acceptable, then I think that will really build trust, as well as genuine use cases. Because if they don't have a genuine use case, if there's no demand for it, no one's going to buy it. Until there's this genuine demand and people see the value in these things, maybe through social proof or as the industry matures, that's really going to drive it as well. So it almost kind of comes, the service designer in me is thinking of those 4 lenses of like a perfect product, right? Is it desirable? So are there use cases for it? Do people want it? Is it a priority for them at this time? Is it feasible? So does it work? Is it accurate? How does it work? Does it fit within our systems? Is it viable? Is the cost worth it? Is the investment in time and effort training the models worth it? Does it work out of the box, or do I need to do all this additional work? Does it add to my workload? Because people are quite resistant to changing the way they do things. And the last one is usability. We all know that you could have a product, name it, your favorite streaming service, your favorite mobile phone, my water bottle, my mouse. It could have all the features in the world and promise everything, but if it's not usable and user friendly and people enjoy using it, then it will fail. So I think trust and those 4 components of like a very good product and a very good user experience are what's going to really help it succeed.
Great. So Terry said it's inevitable that some organizations going to start, using this kind of AI-powered tools, and if it's going to save them a lot of time and cost, that would mean their services would be much cheaper for the client. So we could see some kind of competition there, and that can be a starting point for many businesses to adopt AI-powered tools, right? And with that, can we say there might be more access to justice? Lyria, what do you think about that?
So I think, there's certainly, it is the case that there are some tools that can be built to enhance access to justice. I think that's undeniable. So, what is access to justice? For a lot of people, they just want to know something relatively simple, right? They have a legal question and they want to get an answer, that applies to them. And we can build those. This is, again, that expert system point. Like, we can build those systems now. Similarly, people might want to know, is it worth bringing litigation? How much money am I likely to get in damages or whatever? And then again, you can have systems that can at least give people a clue to what that answer might be, and that might be more of a machine learning system. The question is not whether there are systems we can come up with that could potentially increase access to justice. I think it's a question of, starting from, the other way around. What are the access to justice problems, and how many of them can be solved by these kinds of systems? And the truth is, if you ask the question that way around, I don't think AI is sort of an easy answer to what is a very complex set of access to justice problems. I think there has to be a whole range of different solutions, and there might be some computer system-y parts of that puzzle, but it will not be, by any stretch of the imagination, the whole picture.
I just want to, if I may, just jump in and underscore something there that Lyria said. We tend to sometimes jump into and assume that technology equals increased access to justice. But of course, if you don't have access to technology, then you don't even get to the first step. So, and I know you mentioned that, Lyria, I know that's something close to your heart as well, but I just want to underscore that, because it's not the same. Tech does not equal access to justice for those reasons.
And I think it can help facilitate. So the things that Lyria is saying and Terry was saying involve kind of automating what it's effectively automating or increasing access to certain bits of information. So having that kind of expert system where it can at least say, okay, is your matter, and it doesn't need to be complicated. It can say, is your matter relating to family law, this, 3, 4, great. Of that, is it relating to this, this, this? And at least it can help triage a material percentage of those queries that would otherwise have had to go to a lawyer, so they'll have to wait for it. They may not have the resources to reach that person. They may have language barriers, for example, or knowledge barriers. So I think a lot of that automation, if it's done well, can reduce cost, which is another one of the kind of hindrances. Lyria?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to jump in and say that, you know, what I was, I suppose, trying to get at in terms of the broad access to justice problem. I mean, the first part of the access to justice problem is, do people think of their problem as a justice problem? Like, do they actually, whenever they have a problem, they actually go, oh, this is a legal problem. Okay. You know, let alone it's a, you know, okay, family law might be relatively easy, but people often don't categorize their problems into those kinds of categories. And, you know, yes, you can have free search tools that then can, but I think the more you sort of really get a grasp on it, and maybe this is also going back to in your earlier question about, you know, why do they use it more in medicine than law? You know, it's very different kinds of problems being solved in each of those domains. And, you know, it's not necessarily helpful to sort of say more is better in something like access to justice. I think it's really a question of, you know, understanding the big nature of the access to justice problem, looking at where tech can help, either in reducing legal costs by making legal service delivery more efficient, or by providing people with certain kinds of answers that are really, really helpful to a bulk of people, and then making sure they can find the tools that will give them those answers, which of course is a big part of the problem, because when you Google, if you're not careful, you'll get the answer to the law in California. So, you know, there's a whole sort of stack there that is a little bit more complicated than, you know, it's just the AI bit of the problem.
Yeah, if I, in my experience working with clients as well, a lot of the time people are so quick to jump to these super complex tools, when really things like an FAQ list or a template email will move the needle faster and further than taking 9 months and spending X amount of dollars and effort in adopting some insanely complex system. Like, I think people, and this is kind of where just starting small and just really knowing what the underlying problem is that you want to solve. Like, we advocate, you don't need to, you know, like, these tools are fantastic and their use cases are so broad and the user experience is getting better and better. But sometimes it's just a matter of like, let's understand the process and let's fix the process and do what we can. And then we can consider taking the high fidelity approach.
Great. So I just want to be very conscious about the time. Can you, I know it's difficult, what can you quickly tell me, how do you imagine the future of, you know, legal profession? What's going to be the nature of legal work? Let's say in the next 10 years, if the legal departments and organizations and the court process, we start adopting these kind of tools, how would you see it? What would be the title of the jobs? What would be the, you know, nature of workplace? Terry.
I think that it's almost, I think that it's moving at a pace where whatever we imagine now is going to be wrong very soon. And so that's why I always hesitate to predict too much, because the reality is, and to go back to your point, Amin, you know, just look at medicine, just look at what they are doing with artificial intelligence application in medicine, and how it's actually changed the entire mindset about how one approaches medicine, which is all about preventing something before it happens versus reacting to it and trying to cure it. So I think we are going to see a digitization increase of the work that we do, which is going to lead us down a whole bunch of different ways in terms of how we work quite differently, but also where we do it and how we do it. And we're starting to see some of that come through, really, I think, as a result of COVID increasing even a little bit. We've got to get a silver lining out of it somewhere, right? Increasing a little bit in terms of how differently people want to work and where they want to work. But I would say, as we look ahead, that the greatest part of being a lawyer is going to continue to be our humanity. And so I think that we are going to sit side by side with technology stripping out all of those things that can be stripped out. All of the commoditized, routinized stuff will get stripped out one way or the other. We will sit actually at those points, and I think Lyria kind of alluded to it earlier, of where we are exercising judgment, primarily where we're exercising judgment. So creativity, empathy, experience, where that is being applied, which will be the more complex parts of trying to determine which way forward. And that will sit in parallel. So I don't think it's going to be either or. There will be something, sure, that we won't continue to do. But I think we're going to sit in that bit. And so to me, that really changes not just the nature of the practice, but the nature of the people in the practice, how we conceive work, but also the people that you'll need and the sort of skills and capabilities that you'll need. And it's way beyond the tech bit, because that will become a given, like a law degree has become a given to practice as a lawyer. The bit around the humanity bit, that's going to be something that will be your differentiator.
Great. Lyria, you want to add something?
Yeah, only one little thing. And I loved what you said at the end there, Terry, about humanity and that being really important. I think what will make people successful in the future is the ability to work alongside systems. So I don't think we need a world where, every lawyer knows how to code. Some will, that's lovely, and they'll have, specialist jobs at the intersection of the two. But what I think will be the sort of recipe for success in using these kinds of systems well is understanding them. I think a lot of the time at the moment, systems have actually been used very poorly. I mean, I gave the Compass example. I mean, just saying, oh, we've got a machine learning risk assessment data-driven tool, let's throw that into parole and bail decisions, shows that they don't understand what these tools do. So the people who can understand that, who get enough about expert systems, machine learning to go, okay, this is what this kind of system can do. Here's its weaknesses. Before I use it, these are the things I want to test and evaluate. And now I'm using it. Here's how I know I can work effectively alongside it to actually form those judgments. So I understand the outputs and I understand the limitations of those outputs. People who can do that, I think that will be the recipe for success.
Great.
Yeah.
Alex? Yeah.
I think I would tend to agree. So I think the question was around, redefining legal education. What does the future of the profession look like? And I think, look at that. I use some predictive algorithms to, yeah. All right, cool. That one worked. I'll keep training that one. I think to me, it's the whole concept of T-shaped lawyers really comes to play as well. So, the traditional view of lawyers being, just very, very good at their specific fields. I think as the world as the world changes and as the use cases require broader knowledge, so understanding of systems, I think is an absolute critical one. The understanding that IT is converging on everything we do. So almost everything will have some kind of digital lens or some kind of technological lens, which needs to be understood. But then also those skills for lawyers to improve user experience. So things like, service design is encroaching on law. It's now called legal service design because it helps improve a user experience. Things like project management, which from other disciplines are now encroaching on law because they're called legal project management, because they've realized, hey, we can look to this other industry and see how they're doing things and apply the same learnings or processes to what we do. Shocker. Incredible. Groundbreaking concept.
Sorry.
No, yeah. And that's kind of, that was where I was going with that. But I mean, to Terry's point as well, it's really around the low-hanging fruit are those low complexity, repeatable kinds of work that can be automated. And I mean, if you plan on going into the legal industry to do low complexity, repeatable work, then yes, maybe you should be worried your role may change from what you envisioned. But what we're seeing a lot of clients, the key thing that they want in their legal function through legal technology or transformation is the lawyers just want to do more meaningful work. They want to do work that's more strategic, that really drives the needle forward and play that role as that trusted advisor, not just some widget factory that pumps out contracts, simple things. So I think that's really, at the heart of what legal tech and legal ops is there for, and what will actually, that compelling vision that will draw people towards it.
Terry?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think it's beyond the T shape, actually. And
Potentially,
I know we've had the D shape and the O shaped lawyers, since then as well. There's so many shapes, so little time. But I think that the reason that I say that is because I think, just to kind of maybe add on to what you were saying there, Alex, I think the practice of law is a multidisciplinary endeavor, shall I say now, a multidisciplinary business. And I think the folks that work in legal departments have always known that, because they're part of obviously a much bigger whole with a lot of other specialists around them. But I think increasingly we're seeing a whole bunch of, and this is getting probably a little bit into career options now, a whole bunch of other specialisms that have arisen and are now increasingly prevalent in law firms. I think there has to be, if the growth of what's expected of you in terms of not just the content of legal services and advice that you give, but the way that you deliver it, you're starting to get into a whole bunch of specialisms around that. And it's too much to expect lawyers to keep expanding the top of the T to take all of those things in. Certainly they have to understand the context and be all over that, but there are other specialists that can genuinely jump in and do those roles more effectively. They may have started as lawyers, they may not, but I think it is that combined effort of specialism that we're increasingly seeing, for good reason, in the practice of law now.
Yeah, so on that note, it feels like we are putting too much weight on the individuals to, kind of catch up. How should we redefine the legal education to prepare people, future graduates for that kind of legal environment in, let's say, next 5 to 10 years? And like personally, to me, teaching them one specific skill wouldn't do it, because it's exponential, technology, things changing very fast, and something new happens, everything, goes in a different way. To me, it's like we should teach them how to be adaptable. And as Terry said, learning how to work, with people in different fields, like multidisciplinary teamwork, or what they call it, flash teams. Those kind of skills that help them, to adapt themselves and be confident enough to learn anything from, any area of knowledge. I think that's the kind of thing they probably gonna need. Lyria, you disagree, I guess.
Yeah, no. I think that, look, I divide these up into several boxes, right? And I was actually just typing an answer to Marcus's great question as well, because it comes to the same point. Some students will do multidisciplines. There will be data scientists and lawyers, or there'll be computer scientists and lawyers, and those students will have awesome roles, right, doing really, really cool things. And we can run elective courses to really help students who really want to go a lot deeper into those things beyond the dual degree obvious example of doing both disciplines fully. What I think everyone needs, though, is a different thing. It's a basic familiarity. So I think everyone needs to have a basic sense of what machine learning is, what its limitations is, how it works, what kind of logic it involves, what data-driven inferencing is, all of that kind of stuff. And plus also an ability then to work with people in those other disciplines. So I'll give you an example of a course I'm running at the moment, which is law students and engineering students actually in the same classroom, learning from each other in common problem solving. And it's around a particular area, it's around cybersecurity. So the engineering students are doing security engineering, the law students are doing the regulation around cybersecurity. And they have to work together to answer questions like, oh, you work for a company that is looking to build a fleet of automated vehicles. What are the risks the board should be aware of, and do you recommend they go ahead? Obviously more detail in the tutorial problem than that. But you can only answer that question by getting everyone in a room and working on it together. And it's the same kind of thing about, you know, these kinds of machine learning systems and what gets used and what doesn't get used and how it gets used. You want students who can ask the right questions of people with the right technical knowledge. And that's a skill that we aren't necessarily doing well across the board in universities, because we put students in separate classrooms so much and, don't have them talking to each other. But there's lots of opportunities that, universities are doing, whether it's getting them together around particular projects, getting them together, for particular subjects. And the more we can do that and expose students to the idea that they will be the expert in the room, but only on one thing, I think the more we avoid the kind of bad applications that we've been talking about.
Great. That's amazing. That, yeah, I know some faculties are developing such courses that allow students for the first time to work with the students from other disciplines on one project, like let's think together and learn how to communicate. And that communication part is, I think, is very important. Again, from a personal perspective, I've worked with people from different disciplines and I found it very difficult to communicate with them because the way they think about the legal issue is very different than the way we think about legal issue, and the other way around, of course. Alex, did you want to add something?
No, I think Terry and Lyra covered it quite well. I think for me, in terms of the, equipping future generations of lawyers with the right skills, like Lyra mentioned, I think it's just understanding the how. So how do these systems work, just at a very basic level? So you have an understanding of, okay, this was the input, this was the output, and understanding what goes on in between. And that also helps you navigate these tools and regulate for these tools. The other thing is probably like the what. So what are the actual use cases? Because in reality, the actual practice of law will vary year on year. So having a good understanding of what does the modern lawyer do, what tools do they use, like how are they using technology to deliver legal services and improve the delivery of legal services. And the last one is the why. So understanding why it's there, like why is it being adopted? Why is AI supplementing what we're doing? And that also, and kind of why do people like it? It's actually building that desirability and that interest in something, which will lead them to pretty much the other things as well. But that's probably my summary. Yeah.
I mean, can I just add, I would add one thing to that. And I think it still is fundamentally important to contemporize the curriculum. So I look at something like, and contextualize it, I guess. I look at something like technology, and it's pervasive. It doesn't matter what subject you want to teach. It has some relevance. And I think it doesn't matter that the technology that you're learning on, of course, you have to update the curriculum, but is going to change because the law that you learn at law school doesn't stay the same for, 10 or 20 or 30 years. So you're constantly updating yourself with that. So, if we've got a subject in banking and finance, why are we not teaching cryptocurrencies? If we're teaching a subject in contract, why are we not talking about blockchain and smart contracts? I mean, all of those elements to me are just part of what folks are going to encounter in that subject area. And it doesn't take a lot to contemporize it. It doesn't take a lot to include it. If we're doing a subject on dispute resolution, why aren't we looking at online dispute resolution? So I just think there's those simple tweaks that are also important to put into the curriculum, as well as the ones that have already been mentioned.
Well, Terry, one serious problem I see here is that we don't have any kind of map, like how's the industry is going and what are the needs to kind of inform the universities, the faculties that, okay, these are the things, this is the direction, guys, this is what we need. You need, for instance, electives in these areas, and that's very difficult to create. When I'm saying it, I know it's a difficult task, but I think that should be a priority if we want to connect the generation that we are educating and what they learn would be relevant in the future to what they're gonna do and what the market needs, and to kind of improve their employability. So we are almost out of time, and I think we have enough time probably for one question. Just quickly, is there any support available, forums, etc., to individual startups seeking to innovate using AI in the legal space?
Yes.
Thank you.
Do you want more than that? Yeah, look, I think you could. Here's a couple of really, really, really fast suggestions, and I'm very happy if you want to grab me on LinkedIn and chat further about it. But there's the Australian Legal Technology Association, join it. Sorry, and I apologise for the shameless plug. There's the Centre for Legal Innovation where we have a bunch of free stuff available. That's why I feel comfortable emphasising it, for you to jump in and kind of have a look there. There are legal hackers meetings, depending on where you are, in a lot of different cities where you can jump in and start learning about it. And there are technology incubators and accelerators. There's not a lot of them, but there are some. You can apply to them. They're run by law firms by and large, but there's also some outstanding clinics that are being run now at universities where you really do get a very close connection. And Lyria will know more about those, I'm sure, than me. And she's involved with at least one of them, I believe, or at least a centre that knows lots about them. You should be jumping all over those opportunities as well.
The stuff I know, there's a lot of university stuff, and that'll depend on your university. And I actually don't know University of Wollongong. But what I'd also say as well is that people who've done startups tend to actually be quite generous to people who are interested in doing startups. And you can often just reach out on LinkedIn and say, you know, you're looking at getting into that space with other people who've tried it or succeeded in it. And I think, you know, generally speaking, you find quite a generous response, and people will, you know, help.
I just want to underscore that. Hugely generous community. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure who asked the question, but at University of Wollongong, I'm not sure if we have startup courses like entrepreneurship, but next year probably we're gonna have one, which is developed by me. That part of it would be, yeah, about entrepreneurship and developing legal tech apps. Anyway, so we are almost, it's almost time. I'm sorry we don't have any more time to read the questions and answer. I just want to thank the panel for their time and this amazing discussion. I wish we had more time. 1 hour is not definitely enough for these kind of things. And I had to skip lots of cool stuff. And I just want to also thank Trish Mundy, the head of law school at UW, and UW Law alumni organizers, Meg Gibson, Kelly Salmon, Marion Finlay, who've been helping organizing this session, and behind the scene they've been doing things and doing all the communications. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.